This model has long succeeded in describing many facets of our multifaceted reality, but increasingly, since the revelations of Einstein and the paradigm-crushing implications of quantum physics, Newton's world is quietly fading from view and being replaced by a more spiritual science. Lynn McTaggart wrote, "Up until the present, biology and physics have been handmaidens of views espoused by Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics. These, at their essence, created a worldview of separateness. Newton described a material world in which individual particles of matter followed certain laws of motion through space and time. The universe as a machine. The Newtonian world might have been law-abiding, but ultimately it was a lonely, desolate place. The world carried on, one vast gearbox, whether we were present or not. Our self-image grew even bleaker with the work of Charles Darwin. His theory of evolution is a life that is random, predatory, purposeless, and solitary. Be the best, or don't survive. You are no more than an evolutionary accident. These paradigms, the world as a machine, man as survival machine, have led to a technological mastery of the universe, but little real knowledge of any central importance to us. On a spiritual and metaphysical level, they have led to the most desperate and brutal sense of isolation. They also have got us no closer to understanding the most fundamental mysteries of our own being: how we think, how life begins, why we get ill, how a single cell turns into a fully formed person, and even what happens to human consciousness when we die. Newton's mechanistic, mathematical model is attractive with its law-abiding, predictable structure, but it repeatedly falls short in describing a wide array of phenomena which classical physics is thus forced to deny or ignore. These include things such as consciousness, the observer effect, the measurement problem, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, non-locality and quantum entanglement, particle-wave duality, bilocation, telepathy, psychokinesis, clairvoyance, precognition, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, ghosts, shamanic spiritual healing, acupuncture, prayer, the placebo effect, psychoneuroimmunology, and many more anomalies, all of which are at odds with classical physics and will be examined in the coming chapters. Fritjof Capra wrote, "The worldview which was changed by the discoveries of modern physics had been based on Newton's mechanical model of the universe. This model constituted the solid framework of classical physics. It was indeed a most formidable foundation, supporting, like a mighty rock, all of science and providing a firm basis for natural philosophy for almost 3 centuries. The stage of the Newtonian universe, on which all physical phenomena took place, was the 3-dimensional space of classical Euclidean geometry. It was an absolute space, always at rest and unchangeable. In Newton's own words, absolute space, in its own nature, without regard to anything external, remains always similar and immovable. All changes in the physical world were described in terms of a separate dimension, called time, which again was absolute, having no connection with the material world and flowing smoothly from the past through the present to the future. Absolute, true, and mathematical time, said Newton, of itself and by its own nature, flows uniformly without regard to anything external." The first steps away from Newtonian physics came with Einstein's theory and subsequent experimental proofs of relativity showing Newton to be incorrect in his view of absolute space and absolute time. Instead, both space and time have proven to be relativistic, interrelated concepts, which are now more appropriately referred to as space-time. As written by physicist Mendel Sachs, the real revolution that came with Einstein's theory was the abandonment of the idea that the space-time coordinate system has objective significance as a separate physical entity. Instead of this idea, relativity theory implies that the space and time coordinates are only the elements of a language that is used by an observer to describe his environment. Einstein showed that space and time are not absolute structures with independent a priori existence as classical physics espouses. In fact, space and time are relativistic and subjective. a notion which metaphysically places them subordinate to the mind or consciousness perceiving them. The mystical implications of this discovery are vast and will be covered in detail later, but first let's examine whether or not we even live in a material universe at all. What has modern physics discovered about atoms, the so-called building blocks of matter? Peter Russell wrote, "For 2,000 years it was believed that atoms were tiny solid balls, a model clearly drawn from everyday experience. Then, as physicists discovered that atoms were composed of more elementary subatomic particles, electrons, protons, neutrons, and such like, the model shifted to one of a central nucleus surrounded by orbiting electrons. Again, a model based on experience. An atom may be small, a mere billionth of an inch across, but these subatomic particles are 100,000 times smaller still. Imagine the nucleus of an atom magnified to the size of a grain of rice. The whole atom would then be the size of a football stadium, and the electrons would be other grains of rice flying round the stands. As the early 20th century British physicist Sir Arthur Eddington put it, matter is mostly ghostly empty space. 99.999999% empty space, to be a little more precise."